All right, guys. So, welcome. Happy Friday. I hope you are ready for a lovely weekend. All right, so hopefully that first video provided a little bit of background on what we're going to be doing today. So, we're still going to be doing the same sort of thing. All right, but this time we have an a in front of our squared term. So, that means that we need to still use the x method like we have been, but all right, we just have to do another extra step like we did in that previous video. So our I can statement is I can factor ax squared plus bx plus c and solve for roots. Okay, so when solving and factoring, all right, your first step is always to see if you have a GCF. If you have a greatest common factor that you can pull out of everything, then it's going to make your life a whole lot easier, and it's going to make the equation that much easier to solve. All right, second step, all right, use the x factor method, which we have been using. All right, and then reverse window, which we haven't learned, but I can teach you guys if you would like to. All right. Usually if you do steps 1 and step 2, you don't need step 3. But again, we can learn it if you want me to teach you. So let's just jump into it and do this first example. So we have 5x squared plus 15x plus 10. All right, I noticed right away that 5, 15, and 10 all have a greatest common factor of 5. So then when I divide all these terms by 5, I'm left with 1 here. So that's just x squared left over. 3 here. And then I still need my x. And then 2 here. All right, so once I do that, I can use what's inside in my x. So multiply to 2 and add to 3. All right, so hopefully you figured out it was 2 and 1. All right, so we still need to keep this 5 around. It doesn't really affect the problem, but we still need to keep it around when we factor. So 5 times x plus 2 times x plus 1. All right, and that gives us the answer to our first problem. All right, but let's take a look now at the next two. So unfortunately, we cannot factor out a GCF. All right, even though 1 is the GCF, it's no use to factor it out. So we just have to leave it as it is. So we're going to do the x method. All right, still. So we're going to do 4 times 3, and that goes up top. So 4 times 3 is 12, that goes up top. 13, all right, goes on the bottom. So I need to figure out two numbers that multiply to 12 and add to 13. So if you have that sheet, all right, you should be able to figure out that it's 12 and 1. All right, and then if you remember from the last video, I still need to divide by what's in front of my squared term. So I divide both sides by 4. 12 divided by 4 does reduce, so thumbs up for that. So that's 3. So that means this part is x plus 3. Over here, if you remember, this is what we add or subtract from x, and this is the denominator, which is 4 this time. This, in this case, is the coefficient of our x. Okay, so that means we have 4x and then plus 1. So now what I need to do is smush everything together. So I have x plus 3 times 4x plus 1. And that's my answer. All right, so if we slide on to b now, all right, 3x squared minus 7x plus 2. So unfortunately, again, we don't have a GCF, so we're just going to jump right into the x method. So 3 times 2, that gives me 6. That's what goes up top. The negative 7, that goes below. So my 6 tells me that the signs, all right, of my p and q need to be the same. All right, this negative 7 tells me that they are both negative. So two numbers that multiply to 6 but add to 7, if you figured it out, you get 1 and 6. And they're both negative. Don't want to forget that. So now what we can do is we divide by 3. All right, on the left, that doesn't reduce, but again, the bottom is your coefficient of the x, so that means 3x, and then in the numerator, that's what we add or subtract from our x, so I get minus 1. On the left, or on the right, I should say, we have negative 6 over 3. That reduces to negative 2, so that means we have x minus 2, and then like on A, we just need to smush our binomials together. So 3x minus 1 times x minus 2. And hopefully we're feeling pretty good so far. Nothing too over the top. All right, we just got to remember some of the rules. All right, so now for the last one on the front, 2x squared minus 5x minus 7. So no GCF, unfortunately. So straight into the x method. So 2 times negative 7 is negative 14. All right, and then the negative 5 goes on the bottom. All right, so now we're going to think of two numbers that multiply to 14 and are 5 apart because my top term is negative. Okay, so two numbers that multiply to 14 and are 5 apart. If you look at your sheet, all right, you should know that it's 7 and 2. All right, and then because this 5 is negative, okay, I want to add them together, it has to equal negative 5, so I need to make my 7 negative. Once you do that, we again divide by the number that's in front of our squared term, which is 2. All right, on the right, that reduces to 1. So that means this is x plus 1. On the right, remember your denominator is the coefficient of your x. And then minus 7 is what you're adding or subtracting. So you get 2x minus 7. And then we make them kiss. So 2x minus 7 times x plus 1. All right, you always want to remember to write your final answer with your two binomials next to each other. All right, so far so good, I hope. All right, hopefully you're not giving this sub too much trouble. All right. And now we have two more problems that we're going to do together. Okay. On example 4, we have negative 4x minus 8 plus 5. Okay. So this problem, again, we don't have a GCF, but we are going to factor out something to make our lives easier. So I want to make the coefficient of my squared term positive. Okay, if that is positive, then factoring is so much easier. All right, factoring with a negative coefficient makes everything a lot harder than it needs to be. So I'm going to factor out a negative 1 from everything. So when I divide by negative 1, that means I'm just going to flip the signs. So I have 4x squared plus 8x, and now I have minus 5. All right, so because we don't have anything else we can factor out, we're just going to jump straight into the x method. So 4 times negative 5 gives me negative 20, and then my 8 goes down below. So because we're multiplying to a negative number, one of my answers has to be negative and one has to be positive, and they have to be 8 apart from each other. So two numbers that multiply to 20 and are 8 apart, if you look at your factor sheet, all right, 1 and 20 don't work. 2 and 10, oh, what do you know? Those are 8 apart. So 2 and 10 are both 8 apart, and then because this 8 is positive, I'm going to make my 2 negative. Okay, so now we're going to divide by, all right, the coefficient of our squared term. So we're going to divide both sides by 4. All right, nothing is going to end up being a whole number. That's okay. We can still reduce, which we need to do. So negative 1 over 2. All right, so that means I have 2x minus 1. And then over here reduces to 5 over 2, which means I have 2x plus 5. And then like before, I'm going to make them give a little fist bump. So 2x minus 1 times 2x plus 5. And then I'm going to bring down my negative 1 because it doesn't want to be all alone. And Shazam. So the last problem that we have to do together is a word problem. All right, this time we're actually going to solve it. So the length of a rectangular game reserve is 1 mile longer than twice the width. The area of the reserve is 55 square miles. What is the width of the reserve? So I'm going to start by drawing a picture because that always helps me. All right, so they don't tell us the width. All right, so the width for me is going to be x. All right, the length is 1 mile longer, so plus 1, than twice the width, so 2x. The area is 55, so that's what I'm going to put in my rectangle. So if you remember how to find the area of a rectangle, it's length times width. So x times 2x plus 1, that all equals 55. So I'm going to distribute the x. So x times 2x is 2x squared, and x times 1 is, and then that still equals 55. All right, and then like we said yesterday, we can't solve a trinomial and factor it out unless it equals 0. So I'm going to subtract 55 from both sides. So I have 2x squared plus x minus 55 equals 0 now. So if you notice, there's no GCFs, sad face. So I'm going to set up my x method right there. All right, so 2 times negative 55 is negative 110, and then 1 goes down below. All right, so unfortunately your table does not go all the way up to 110, but that's okay. None of the homework should go up that high. So I'm going to figure out what two numbers multiply to 110 and are 1 apart. So I know that because I end in a 0, I can divide by 10. So if I divide by 10, I end up getting 11 as my dividend, which means they're 1 apart. So 10 and 11 are my answers that I'm looking for. Because this is a positive 1 and this is a negative 110, that means my 10 has to be the negative number. So now I need to divide by 2 because that's the coefficient of my squared term. So that means negative 10 over 2 reduces to negative 5. So that means this side is x minus 5. On the right-hand side, it doesn't reduce, but remember the denominator is the coefficient of the x, and then the numerator is what you add or subtract from that. So 2x plus 11. So we're going to go up here, x minus 5 times 2x plus 11 equals 0. All right, so I'm going to solve for x now. All right, so x minus 5 equals 0. So I'm going to add 5 to both sides. So I get x equals 5. All right, that's my first solution. 2x plus 11 equals 0. I'm going to subtract 11. So 2x equals negative 11. And then I'm going to divide by 2. So I get x equals negative 11 over 2. That's my second solution. But, all right, we're talking about width, which is length. And can we have a length that is negative? The answer is no. If you thought we could have a negative length, then we're going to have a talk, but we cannot. So unfortunately, x cannot equal negative 11 over 2. So our only answer for this problem is x equals 5. So hopefully, all right, you don't have too many questions walking away from the notes today. If you do, all right, and you're super frustrated about what we learned today, shoot me an email. I will do my best to get back to you as quickly as possible, but I am kind of busy this weekend. All right, but I hope you guys have a great weekend. Come in with questions on Monday. I can't wait to see you guys back here. Peace.